There are rare individuals in history who reshape entire institutions simply by stepping into them, but rarer still is the person whose quiet, calculated patience becomes the most powerful force in the room. For the British monarchy, that person is Prince William, and this is the story of how everything changed. The night that shifted everything. On the evening of September 8, 2022, the world held its breath as Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. After 70 years on the throne, the woman who had defined an era was gone. The nation mourned, the cameras rolled, the tributes flooded in. But while the world was watching the grief, something else was happening entirely off camera. Something quiet, something permanent, something that would have consequences nobody was fully prepared for. Prince William went to bed that night as he always had, a prince, an heir, a son. He woke up the next morning as the controller of one of the most formidable private financial empires in the United Kingdom. No ceremony marked it, no speech announced it. The law simply moved, as it always does, and suddenly William held everything. We are talking about an inheritance valued at over £1.2 billion, and attached to that inheritance was something far more loaded than money. There was history inside it, there were records, there were names, and for at least one woman in the royal household, there was very good reason to be afraid of what William might find. What William actually inherited. Most people who caught the headlines assumed William had picked up some farmland and a few country cottages. The reality is something on an entirely different scale. The Duchy of Cornwall is not a modest estate. It is a centuries-old financial institution, 135,000 acres of land spanning England and Wales, coastal properties, historic farms, forests, rivers, quarries, and investment portfolios that have been growing and compounding for nearly 700 years. In a recent year alone, the duchy generated over £23 million in income, and under British law, the moment Charles became king, the entire thing transferred immediately and automatically to William as the new heir. No waiting period, no approval process, just transfer. Think about what that means. A man wakes up and over £1 billion has moved into his column overnight. A man wakes up and he now controls the financial records, the property ledgers, the staff decisions, and the payroll of an institution older than most nations. A man wakes up and he has the keys to everything his father had been quietly managing for decades. And then he starts reading. How Charles used the duchy. To understand what William found, you have to understand how the duchy functioned under Charles, and to understand that, you have to go back to 1981. That was the year Charles married Lady Diana Spencer. The world called it the wedding of the century. The cameras captured every detail. But in that same year, away from all of it, Charles made a financial decision that almost no one noticed. He voluntarily reduced his tax contribution from the duchy's income, cutting it from 50% down to 25%. One quiet decision, one signature. The result was millions of additional pounds flowing directly into his personal finances every single year. Diana believed she was building a shared future. She believed the wealth of the duchy was securing their family. What she did not know was that her husband had just engineered an arrangement that would allow him to quietly fund two very separate lives at once. By 1986, Charles had returned fully to his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, and the Duchy of Cornwall, ancient, prestigious, and entirely private, was underwriting both worlds, Diana's household on one side, the affair on the other. Then there is the matter of Highgrove. Charles purchased Highgrove House in Gloucestershire in 1980, the year he ever proposed to Diana. He sold 3 of his own properties to fund it. He selected it personally. He chose it with purpose. Diana moved in after the wedding. She decorated every room. She made it a home. She raised William and Harry inside those walls and spent years there genuinely believing she was building something real. She did not know that during her absences, Charles was bringing Camilla into the same rooms, the rooms Diana designed, the home Diana created. Staff who worked in and around that household later confirmed the pattern, and William grew up inside those walls. He played in those rooms as a child. He watched his mother live her life in that house, and as he grew older, he began to understand exactly what had been happening beneath that roof. Here is the detail that stops people cold. William now owns Highgrove. It belongs to him as Duke of Cornwall, and Charles, the King of England, pays his own son £700,000 per year in rent for the privilege of staying inside those rooms. The man who used the rooms to betray Diana now writes a check to Diana's son every 12 months for the privilege of staying inside them. That is not a footnote. That is the entire story compressed into a single line. The name on the payroll. But Highgrove and the tax arrangement were only part of what waited for William in those duchy records, because buried inside the financial ledgers was a name, and the story behind that name is darker than almost anything that has been publicly reported. The name? Annabel Elliot, Camilla's younger sister. Annabel Elliot had been receiving payments from the Duchy of Cornwall for 20 years. Over the period, the total came to £1.5 million. The official description of her work was interior design services on royal properties, but to understand what those payments may actually represent, you have to go back to December 1992. That was when British Prime Minister John Major stood before the House of Commons and formally announced to the entire country that the Prince and Princess of Wales were separating. Diana's marriage was declared dead in Parliament, in public, for all the world to hear. While Diana was somewhere trying to absorb that moment, a woman was sitting in a car outside Camilla's home, engine running, waiting to spirit Camilla away from the press that had descended on her street. That woman was Annabel Elliot, but her role had not begun there. It had simply become visible there. For years before that day, Annabel and her husband had quietly made their country home available as a regular meeting place for Charles and Camilla. Weekend after weekend, the future king would arrive, and Camilla would be waiting. Annabel knew exactly what was happening under her roof. She facilitated it. She made herself indispensable to the entire arrangement. And then there is the cruelty. Diana stood 5'10" tall. Charles stood an inch shorter. She was acutely, painfully conscious of it at every public event. She physically altered her posture, bending, tilting, contracting herself so that she would not appear to tower over her own husband. Day after day, in front of the world, she shrank herself to protect his ego. Camilla and Annabel considered this hilarious. They mocked the way Diana adjusted herself at public appearances for a man who was spending his free time at Annabel's house. But the cruelty went further still. The week Charles and Diana announced their engagement, Charles placed his hand on Diana's waist and said, casually, almost as an observation, that she was looking a bit chubby there. She was 19 years old. Diana later recorded her own account on tape. She said that comment, combined with everything she was beginning to understand about Charles and Camilla, triggered the onset of bulimia, an eating disorder that began the week her engagement was announced and took her 10 years to overcome. Camilla and Annabel knew about it. Everyone in that circle knew, and as the tabloids tracked Diana's body across the years, calling her skeletal when the illness was at its worst, calling her overweight when she fought her way back, Camilla and Annabel would buy those newspapers and read those headlines aloud to each other. They laughed. Sources say Charles was sometimes present when this happened. He did not ask them to stop. He did not leave the room. He joined in. Now hold that alongside the payroll records, because the question that followed William's inheritance was never simply whether Annabel Elliot had done competent decorating work. The question was whether £1.5 million across 2 decades was compensation for interior design or payment for everything else, for hosting the meetings, for driving the getaway car, for 2 decades of enabling, facilitating, and laughing along. Nobody could prove it either way, but nobody looking at it could unsee what it suggested. The party where Diana confronted the truth. In 1989, the secret unraveled in the most personal way possible. There was a gathering at Lady Annabel Goldsmith's home in London. Diana arrived. Charles and Camilla were nowhere to be seen in the main rooms. Diana noticed. She went looking. Staff physically tried to prevent her from going downstairs. She pushed past them anyway. She found Charles and Camilla alone together in the basement, tucked away from the party, hidden in plain sight. Diana sat Camilla down. She spoke directly and without hysteria. She told Camilla she knew exactly what had been going on. Camilla's response was not remorse. It was not apology. She looked at Diana and essentially said, "You have everything a woman could want: a husband, beautiful children, the admiration of the world. What more could you possibly need?" Diana's reply was 4 words: "I want my husband." Charles said nothing. He sat there while his mistress dismissed his wife and offered her no defense, no word of support, no gesture of